I woke up to the sound of crackling fire, and I hadn't lit one. I had gone camping alone for a weekend in July, something I like to do every summer. It was supposed to be a quiet, isolated trip. I drove out to a lakeside campground in northern Michigan, an ID found on a backwoods forum. The place was remote, off a dirt road that barely seemed maintained, and when I pulled up around dusk, there wasn't another car or tent in sight. That was part of the appeal. The lake was glassy, reflecting the last hints of orange in the sky. I set up my tent a few feet from the waterline, built a small fire of my own, cooked some canned food, and watched the stars come out. It was dead silent except for the lapping water and the occasional insect. By midnight, I crawled into my sleeping bag, unzipped the tent flap for a little breeze, and let the sounds of the night lull me to sleep. At least until 3 a.m. I woke up because I thought I heard voices. Muffled, faint, almost carried on the wind. I pushed myself up, groggy, my ears straining. Across the dark stretch of water, maybe 200 or 300 yards away, was a second campsite. At first, I thought I must have been mistaken earlier, that maybe someone else had come after sundown. But I hadn't heard a car, hadn't heard anyone hammering tent stakes or cutting wood. And yet, there it was, the unmistakable glow of a campfire across the lake. Bright, steady, and far too large to have been there without me noticing. I sat there, frozen, watching the flicker of orange flames ripple across the black water. The voices came again, though I couldn't make out words, just the cadence of conversation, too low and too even, like whispers practiced. The strangest part? The fire didn't seem to smoke. No embers floated up. It was just flames, unnaturally tall, burning in perfect rhythm. I grabbed my flashlight and shined it across, but the beam dissolved uselessly before it reached the far shore. Still, I had the sudden urge to signal, to call out, but my throat locked. Something about the way those voices carried. It didn't feel like normal campers. It felt like they were aware I was listening. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, maybe a ranger station fire or another late-night group. I zipped my tent halfway and laid back down, but the sound didn't stop. The voices got closer, louder. It wasn't possible. They were across the lake. I unzipped the tent completely this time and peered out. My fire had burned down to embers, but that other blaze still roared across the water, unchanged. Except now, the voices weren't faint. They were clear. They were calling my name. I froze in my sleeping bag. At first, I thought I'd imagined it, that my tired brain was filling in syllables. But then it came again, unmistakable. My full name, spoken in a low, slow voice that sounded both male and female at once. I'd never told anyone where I was going. Not family, not friends. I stumbled out of the tent, my flashlight shaking in my hands. I swept it across the tree line near my sight, half expecting someone to be standing there. But nothing. Just dark pines and the sheen of the lake. My light didn't even reach the opposite shore. The voices grew distorted now, layered, as if multiple people were speaking in unison. I clapped my hands over my ears, but the sound pressed in anyway, vibrating through my skull. My own dying fire flared for a moment, like something had breathed on it before snuffing down to black. That was when I noticed it. The fire across the lake wasn't reflecting. The water stayed pitch black. No shimmer, no mirrored flame, nothing. It was as if the lake itself rejected it. My stomach dropped. I shoved my flashlight into my bag, grabbed my car keys, and sprinted toward the dirt lot. Every step felt like dragging through tar. Behind me, the voices rose into a single shriek that seemed to come from the trees, the ground, the air itself. I didn't stop until I was in my car, slamming the locks down. The campsite was out of view, but as I turned the ignition, I made the mistake of glancing into the rearview mirror. Across the lake, the fire was gone. But now, on my side of the shore, between the trees, I saw the faintest glow of orange, flickering, closer than it should have been. I hit the gas, tearing down that uneven dirt road, my headlights bouncing over the ruts. I didn't look back again. When I returned home the next morning, I searched the campground online. Multiple reviews mentioned the same thing: strange lights across the lake at night, campfires that vanished when approached, voices that called people by name. No one ever stayed more than a single night, and I never went camping alone again. We thought we were alone in the water until we heard someone screaming beneath us. It was the summer before my senior year, and like most small-town kids, we made our own fun. That usually meant sneaking beers, building fires, and swimming in the lake after dark. There were 5 of us that night: me, my best friend Kyle, his girlfriend Melissa, her cousin, and one other guy from school. We'd been hanging out on the shore, joking around, when someone suggested we go for a night swim. The moon was bright enough to see the silver ripples on the water. The air was humid, the kind of sticky heat that clung to your skin. It felt like the perfect night. We stripped down to swimsuits, ran laughing into the water, and swam out toward the middle where the lake dropped off deep. Out there, everything was quiet. The kind of quiet you only notice when the laughter dies down. The shore looked farther than it really was, just a dark line against the tree line. It felt both freeing and unnerving, floating on black water that had no bottom you could touch. That's when it started. At first, I thought it was just Melissa goofing around. A high-pitched sound, like a shriek, echoing faintly across the water. But when I turned, she was clinging to Kyle's shoulders, looking just as confused as me. Then the sound came again, louder, raw, desperate, unmistakably human. It was someone screaming for their life. We all went silent, treading water. The sound was coming from the left, not too far, maybe 50 yards out. It was the unmistakable noise of someone thrashing, sputtering, and crying out for help. The kind of scream that makes your body move before your brain catches up. Someone's drowning. Kyle shouted, and he started swimming toward it. The rest of us followed, adrenaline taking over. I remember the water feeling suddenly colder, thicker, harder to move through. My chest tightened as I tried to keep up. But when we got closer, everything stopped. The screams cut off mid-breath, and the water was flat smooth as glass. Not a ripple, not a splash. No one was there. We floated there, gasping, listening. The night was dead silent. The only sound was our own panicked breathing. "Where are they?" Melissa whispered. Her voice cracked. "They couldn't just vanish," Kyle muttered. He spun in circles, scanning the surface, then dove under with a splash. We waited, hearts pounding, until he broke the surface again. Nothing. "It's empty." I didn't want to admit it, but he was right. There was no sign anyone had been there at all. No bubbles, no movement, not even the faintest ripple. Just endless black water. We tried to shake it off, telling ourselves maybe it was a loon or some weird echo, but none of us really believed that. The screams had been too clear, too human. We swam back to shore faster than I thought possible, our strokes frantic. Once on land, dripping and shivering despite the warm air, we built the fire back up and sat close, trying to laugh it off. But no one could. Then, a little after midnight, it happened again. The sound came from the water, louder this time. Not faint or far, but as if it were right off the shore. Screaming, thrashing, desperate. We all jumped up, staring at the lake. The surface looked wrong, completely calm, yet the sound was unmistakable. "Don't go out there," Melissa said, gripping Kyle's arm. "Please." The rest of us agreed. But the screaming didn't stop. It went on, like someone was locked in a loop of drowning forever, never reaching the end. And then, for the first time, I swore I saw something. A pale shape just beneath the waterline. a face breaking the surface for half a second before vanishing again. Eyes wide, mouth open, screaming soundlessly while the noise filled the air. I blinked and it was gone. That was enough for me. I grabbed my stuff, soaking or not, and told the others I was leaving. One by one, they followed. We didn't even put the fire out. We just left it burning and ran for the cars. Driving away, windows down, the sound carried with us. Even when the lake was out of sight, I swore I could still hear faint cries on the wind. I didn't sleep that night. None of us did. The next day, I checked the news and local forums, expecting to see something about a drowning, but there was nothing. No missing person, no accident. It was like it hadn't happened. Except it did. Because to this day, I can't swim in open water anymore. Whenever I'm near a lake, especially at night, I hear it the same desperate screams, echoing across the water, begging for help. And the worst part? Sometimes, late at night, I dream I'm the one screaming. The first knock came exactly at 2:00 a.m., 3 slow raps that shook our motel door, even though no one was supposed to be on that floor. It was the summer of 2016, and my family was on a road trip through the Midwest. After 12 hours of driving, we pulled into a small roadside motel just before dark. It wasn't a chain, just one of those old 2-story places with faded carpet and buzzing neon. My parents got us a room on the second floor at the very end of the hallway. The motel was nearly empty. I remember because when we checked in, the woman at the front desk mentioned we were the only ones booked on the second floor. She even joked that we'd have the whole hallway to ourselves. At the time, it felt like a blessing. No late-night noise, no slamming doors. Just quiet. And it was quiet. Almost too quiet. That first night, I woke up at 2 a.m. to the sound of knocking. It wasn't a frantic pounding, just 3 deliberate knocks on the door. I sat up, staring at it. My dad stirred awake and muttered, "Probably the pipes," before rolling over. I wanted to believe him, but pipes don't knock like that. The next morning, I mentioned it over breakfast, but no one seemed concerned. My mom said maybe it was the wind, even though the hallway was indoors. My younger sister laughed and said maybe the motel was haunted. I laughed with her, but uneasily. The second night, it happened again. Same time, same sound. 3 slow, heavy knocks. This time, my dad got up. He walked to the door and peered through the peephole. Nothing. He even opened the door a crack, but the hallway was empty. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, but there was no one there. He shut the door, locked it again, and told us to go back to sleep. But I couldn't. For the rest of the night, I lay awake listening, convinced I heard faint footsteps pacing the hall. By the third night, I was already dreading it. I tried to stay awake, staring at the glowing red numbers of the alarm clock. 1:45, 1:50, 1:59, and right on Q3 knocks. I jumped. My sister whimpered under her blankets, and my mom whispered sharply for everyone to stay quiet. My dad went to the door again, but this time, instead of opening it, he just stood there. I watched him tense, his hand hovering near the knob, like he was debating what to do. Finally, he whispered, "It's closer this time." That chilled me. He wouldn't explain, but later he admitted it didn't sound like someone knocking on the outside of the door. It sounded like it came from inside the room. The next morning, my parents went to the front desk to complain. I followed, wanting answers. The woman at the desk looked genuinely confused when my dad explained what had been happening. "Sir," she said carefully, "there's no one else checked into the second floor. You're the only guests up there." My mom pressed her. "Then who's been knocking on our door?" The woman frowned, hesitated, then lowered her voice. "People say strange things happen in that wing sometimes. We don't rent those rooms out much." That was all she'd say. My parents debated switching motels, but everything else nearby was booked for the weekend, so we stayed one more night. That fourth night is burned into my memory. I begged to leave the light on, so we did. The room glowed a dull yellow, shadows stretching into the corners. Midnight came and went. We all lay awake, waiting. And then 2 o'clock. The knock came again, but not 3 times. This time it was one, then another, then another. A slow, endless rhythm. Knock, knock. My dad shouted, "Who's there?" But the sound didn't stop. He rushed to the door and flung it open. The hallway was empty, but the knocking continued. It was behind us. All at once, the knocks moved across the walls, first at the far corner of the room, then at the closet door, then at the bathroom. Knock, knock, knock. My sister started crying. My mom grabbed her and pulled her close. My dad stood frozen in the doorway, pale, his voice shaking as he told us to grab our things. We left half our luggage behind, bolting down the hallway barefoot. At the desk, my dad demanded a refund. The clerk just looked at us with tired eyes and said softly, "It's better if you don't stay past the third night." We didn't argue. We got in the car and drove until sunrise. To this day, whenever I stay in a hotel or motel, I check the floor layout, the hallway, and especially the door, because I still remember the sound of those knocks steady, patient, like whatever was in that room wasn't in any hurry. And I'll never forget the feeling that it didn't just want to be heard. It wanted to be let in. I woke up to the sound of something dragging across glass, and when I opened my eyes, there were handprints smeared all over the window beside my bed. It was the middle of July when a group of my friends and I decided to rent a cabin for the weekend. The place was tucked into the woods near a small lake, a 2-story A-frame with creaky floors, and that old wood smell that made it feel both cozy and a little unsettling. We'd booked it online, and the listing described it as remote and private, which we all thought sounded perfect. There were 6 of us in total, 3 couples. The first night went how you'd expect. Grilling on the porch, a few beers, laughing too loud, and swapping scary stories by the fire. When the embers burned down, we all stumbled back inside and picked our rooms. I ended up in the upstairs loft with my girlfriend, while 2 other couples took the bedrooms below. The forest was eerily quiet that night. No crickets, no owls, just the occasional rustle of branches. I remember thinking it was strange, but after a long day of driving and drinking, I fell asleep fast. At some point in the night, though, I woke up, not from a noise inside the cabin, but from something outside. It was a faint squeak, followed by a slow dragging sound, like wet fingers trailing down a window. I sat up in the dark, the moonlight spilling faintly through the glass beside the bed. That's when I saw them. Handprints, dozens of them, pressed into the outside of the glass. Some smeared downward, some overlapping each other. They were pale, foggy outlines, like someone had been breathing heavily and pressing their palms flat against the window. We were on the 2nd floor. My girlfriend stirred awake, groggy, and I quickly pulled the curtain shut so she wouldn't see. I told myself it had to be some weird condensation, or maybe leftover smudges we hadn't noticed before. Still, I didn't sleep much after that. The next morning, I went outside, heart pounding, to check. The prints were there, clear as day, large and small, some with long fingers that stretched unnaturally far. They covered not just the loft window, but several of the downstairs windows, too. Everyone else thought I was messing with them when I pointed it out. "You probably leaned against it yesterday," one of the guys said. But when we measured where the loft prints were, the sill was over 15 feet off the ground. There was no deck, no ledge, no way anyone could have reached them without a ladder. That night, none of us laughed as much. We kept the curtains closed and the lights low, but by midnight, we were all on edge. Every creak in the floorboards made us jump. Around 2 a.m., it started again. The dragging sound, the faint squeaks, coming from the glass. This time, everyone heard it. We gathered in the living room, whispering, too scared to look outside. But curiosity got the better of us. One of the girls pulled the curtain back just a sliver. Handprints, fresh ones, spreading slowly across the window in real time, as if invisible hands were pressing against the glass right in front of us. We bolted upstairs together, locking the bedroom doors, even though we knew locks wouldn't matter against whatever that was. The sounds continued, tap, tap, squeak, moving from one window to the next. At one point, it was directly behind my headboard in the loft, like someone dragging their palms back and forth across the glass inches from me. Then came the knocking. Not loud, but deliberate. One slow knock at a time, circling the cabin. Every window, every wall, like it wanted us to know it wasn't going away. The knocking stopped just before dawn. When the light finally crept through the curtains, we gathered the courage to look. The handprints were everywhere, covering nearly every pane of glass from top to bottom, some so high on the second story, they reached the peak of the A-frame. We didn't even pack properly. We just grabbed what we could, threw it in the cars, and left. Later, I tried searching online for stories about that cabin. All I found were vague reviews, people saying they wouldn't to stay more than a night, or that the place had bad energy. No one mentioned the handprints. To this day, I don't know what it was. A prank? Something worse? All I know is those prints weren't ours. And when I close my eyes at night, I can still hear that sound, the wet drag of palms sliding across the glass, looking for a way in. He was standing at the edge of the tide, smiling and waving at us, and then he was gone. My girlfriend and I were on a short getaway last summer, renting a beachside cottage in a quiet coastal town. It was one of those sleepy places where the streets rolled up after 8 p.m., and the ocean was the only sound at night. On our second evening, after dinner, we decided to take a walk along the shoreline before it got completely dark. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, leaving a deep blue glow across the sky. The beach was empty, the kind of wide stretch of sand that felt infinite when you walked it at dusk. The only sound was the waves rolling in and retreating, steady and calm. That's when I saw him. A little boy, maybe 7 or 8 years old, standing at the water's edge about 50 yards ahead. He was facing us, his outline sharp against the darkening ocean. He had short hair, pale skin that almost seemed to glow in the fading light, and he was waving. At first, I thought maybe he'd wandered off from one of the nearby cottages, but the beach was deserted. No parents, no siblings, no other figures in sight. Just him, silently waving, as if he'd been waiting for us. "Do you see that?" I whispered. My girlfriend nodded, uneasy. "Why is he out here alone?" We picked up our pace, calling out to him. "Hey, buddy, are you okay? Do you need help?" The boy didn't answer. He just kept waving, small and deliberate, his arm moving slowly back and forth. When we were maybe 20 yards away, the water surged higher up the shore, and for a moment, the foam rolled around his ankles. And then he was gone. One blink he was there, the next he wasn't. No splash, no running, no sound, just empty shoreline. We broke into a jog, confused, calling out louder now. My girlfriend's voice echoed across the beach, but no one replied. When we reached the spot where he had been, all we found were footprints. Small, barefoot impressions in the wet sand, leading straight down the shoreline before veering directly into the ocean. The trail ended at the edge of the tide, swallowed by waves. I stood there, staring at the water, my skin prickling with cold. There was no way he could have run off without us hearing, and no way he could have disappeared into the surf that quickly. "Where is he?" my girlfriend whispered, her hand tightening on my arm. I wanted to run into the water, to search, but something in me hesitated. The footprints didn't look right. They were too clear, too sharp in the sand, as if they hadn't been made seconds ago, but preserved there, waiting for us. That's when the air shifted. The evening breeze died, and the ocean went oddly still for a few moments, the sound of waves softening into silence. In that silence, I thought I heard something like faint laughter, carried on the wind. Childlike, distant, but close enough to freeze me in place. My girlfriend pulled me back. "We should go," she said firmly, her voice shaking. We hurried off the beach, not running but close to it, our eyes flicking over our shoulders every few seconds. I kept expecting to see the boy standing behind us again, watching. Back at the cottage, we locked the door and tried to shake it off. We told ourselves it was just some kid playing a prank, that he ran off quickly, that we imagined the laughter. But neither of us believed it. Later that night, as we lay awake listening to the waves, I thought I heard footsteps outside slow, deliberate crunches on the sand just beyond the thin cottage wall. My girlfriend heard it too. She gripped my hand tightly, her breath shallow. When I finally dared to peek through the curtain, the beach was empty. But in the moonlight, I could just make out faint indentations in the sand leading toward our cottage door. We didn't sleep. The next morning, there was no sign of the prince, no boy, no evidence of what we'd seen. But the memory of that pale figure standing at the shoreline, silently waving, hasn't left me since. And every time I walk near the ocean now, I find myself scanning the waterline, half expecting to see him waiting there again, with those small footprints trailing into the sea. Because the way he waved, it didn't feel like a greeting. It felt like an invitation. The trail marker I had just passed was gone, and when I turned around, it was standing in a completely different place. Last October, I took a solo hiking trip in one of the larger national parks near where I live. I've always enjoyed being out in the woods, especially in the fall when the air is crisp and the leaves turn gold and red. The trail I chose was listed as moderate, about 7 miles, and clearly marked. I wasn't worried. I started mid-morning, and for the first couple of hours, it was exactly what I expected. Birds chirping the crunch of leaves under my boots, and the occasional painted wooden sign nailed to a tree with a little arrow pointing the way. The forest was quiet but peaceful. I didn't see another soul. But around the 3-hour mark, something started to feel off. I noticed the first strange thing when I passed a sign nailed to a pine tree, a white arrow pointing left. I followed it, winding down a slope, but a few minutes later, I glanced back and froze. The sign I had just passed wasn't there anymore. In its place, 100 feet behind me, was a different tree with the same arrow pointing in a completely new direction. I thought maybe I was mistaken, that the woods were playing tricks on me, but unease crept in. I pushed forward, checking every few minutes. Each time I looked back, the markers seemed to shift. Sometimes they pointed behind me, sometimes to the right. Once, I could have sworn, I saw the arrow flip while I was staring at it. I told myself I was tired, maybe dehydrated, and stopped for a drink. I checked my map and GPS. The map wasn't much help, and worse, the GPS kept glitching, showing me in the same spot no matter how far I walked. That's when I came to the clearing. It was a wide, circular patch where the trees thinned, carpeted with dead leaves. I don't know why, but it immediately felt wrong. Too quiet. Not even wind moved through it. I crossed it quickly and picked up the trail again. But 20 minutes later, when I pushed through some brush, my stomach dropped. I was standing in the same clearing, the same circle of leaves, the same broken log at the edge. I tried again, took a different fork, hiked faster, checked the sun's position. But no matter which direction I chose, I ended up back in that same clearing. By now, the light was starting to fade, and the forest had turned cold. My nerves were shot. Every crack of a twig made me spin around, convinced I wasn't alone. I yelled out once, just to break the silence, but the sound came back wrong flat, muffled, like the trees swallowed it. On my fifth return to the clearing, I noticed something new. In the soft dirt at the center were footprints, boot prints. Not mine, they were larger, deeper. They led across the clearing and disappeared into the trees. I hesitated, but followed them. The trail wound deeper into the woods, darker now, the trees crowding close. And then I saw it, another trail marker. Relief flooded me until I realized it wasn't the same style. This one was carved directly into the bark of a tree. Deep gouges, almost like claw marks, forming a crude arrow pointing left. I stared at it, heart hammering. I couldn't explain it, but the sight of that carved arrow filled me with dread. It felt wrong, like following it would mean walking into something I wasn't supposed to see. So I turned the other way. I don't remember how long I walked after that. An hour? 2? The forest seemed endless. Every direction looked the same. Every marker felt twisted, misleading. My flashlight eventually died, and I was left with only the dim glow of the moon to guide me. When exhaustion finally forced me to stop, I sank against a tree, shaking. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. At the edge of the clearing, because somehow I was back there again, someone was standing. Tall, motionless, half hidden in the trees. I couldn't make out a face, but I could see the outline of shoulders, arms hanging at its sides, just watching. I shut my eyes, convinced I was hallucinating. When I opened them again, the figure was gone. But in its place, carved into the tree nearest me, was another arrow, pointing directly at where I sat. That's the last thing I remember before morning. Somehow, at first light, I found myself on the main road, less than a mile from the park entrance. My legs were cut and bruised like I'd been running, though I don't remember doing it. I never told anyone the full story, just that I got lost. But sometimes, when I close my eyes at night, I see that clearing again, and I can't shake the feeling that if I ever go back, I won't find my way out a second time. We kept telling ourselves it was a coincidence until the same dented RV showed up 1,000 miles from where we'd first seen it. Last summer, my best friend Eric and I decided to do a cross-country road trip. We were both fresh out of college, broke but restless, and figured if we were ever going to drive from coast to coast, it had to be then. We packed up his old sedan with snacks, sleeping bags, and a cooler, and hit the highway with no real plan other than to stop wherever we felt like. The first few days were uneventful gas stations, motels, and long stretches of interstate. But somewhere in Kansas, at a rest stop just before midnight, we noticed an RV. It wasn't unusual plenty of people traveled in RVs, but this one stood out. It was old, maybe from the 80s, with peeling white paint and a big dent in the back corner. Its rear window was taped over with a black trash bag, fluttering in the breeze. I remember joking to Eric that it looked like something out of a horror movie. We stretched our legs, grabbed sodas from the vending machine, and got back in the car. That should have been the end of it. But it wasn't. The next afternoon, somewhere in Colorado, we pulled into a gas station off the highway. And there it was again, the same RV. Same dent, same taped-up window, parked 2 rows over from us. Man, that can't be the same one, Eric muttered, but his voice wavered. I walked around it just to check. Same rusty bumper, same faded stickers on the back. It was definitely the same RV. But when I peeked toward the driver's seat, it was empty. No one in sight. We told ourselves it was a weird coincidence. Maybe it was heading west like we were. Still, we couldn't shake the unease. Over the next several days, it kept happening. At a truck stop in Utah, there it was again, parked at the far edge of the lot. In Nevada, we stopped at a diner, and through the dusty window, we saw it parked across the street. In California, pulling into a beachside rest area, I nearly swerved when I spotted that same dented corner in the rearview mirror. Every time, we never saw who was driving it, never once saw someone get out. It would just be sitting there, like it had been waiting for us. By then, we weren't laughing about it anymore. The car rides grew quieter, the miles longer. We started checking the mirrors obsessively, scanning every lane behind us. One night, outside a small desert town, we pulled into a motel. The lot was mostly empty, but parked directly under the single flickering streetlight was the RV. This time, something changed. As we hauled our bags out of the trunk, we heard the sound of the RV's engine turning over. Low, heavy, rumbling to life. Headlights flared, briefly illuminating us. My stomach dropped. Eric grabbed my arm. "Get inside. Now." We bolted for the motel lobby, slamming the glass door behind us. When I turned back, the headlights were gone. The RV sat in darkness again, quiet, like nothing had happened. Neither of us slept that night. We double-locked the room, pulled the curtains tight, and sat in silence. Every few minutes, I swore I heard the crunch of gravel outside, like footsteps circling the building. By morning, the lot was empty. The RV was gone. We tried to laugh it off, convincing ourselves we'd finally lost it. But later that day, on a lonely stretch of highway, I saw it again in the side mirror. 100 yards back, moving steady, never getting closer, never falling behind. Just there. It followed us for hours. Finally, Eric snapped. He jerked the car onto an exit ramp, tearing down a series of back roads until we were half lost. When we finally stopped, gasping, the RV was nowhere in sight. Relieved, we found our way back to the highway and kept going. The rest of the trip was quiet. No sign of it again. By the time we got home, it almost felt like a bad dream. But a week later, back in my own city, I left my apartment to grab groceries. And when I stepped into the parking lot, I froze. There, at the far end, sat the same RV. Same dent, same taped-up window. It hasn't moved since. And I still haven't seen who's inside. The first knock came from behind a door the innkeeper swore had been locked for 50 years. Last fall, my girlfriend and I decided to take a weekend trip along the coast of Maine. We booked a stay at a quaint old seaside inn, one of those creaky, historic places with peeling paint, floral wallpaper, and a lobby that smelled faintly of salt and mildew. It wasn't fancy, but it had character. When we checked in, the innkeeper, an older man with sun-spotted skin and a shaky voice, handed us a brass key on a faded leather fob. "Room 12, he said, then added with a chuckle, "Don't go snooping. Old houses like this have secrets." At the time, we laughed it off. But later, I realized he hadn't been joking. The first night was quiet. Our room overlooked the ocean, and the sound of the waves was soothing. The bed creaked, the walls groaned, but that was expected in a building older than our grandparents. The next morning, after breakfast, we decided to explore. The inn had 2 long hallways upstairs, lined with guest rooms. Most were clearly occupied doors, slightly ajar with luggage visible inside. But at the far end of the second hall, there was one door that stood out. The number plate was missing, the wood was faded, and a heavy brass padlock hung across it. Dust coated the frame, and unlike the other rooms, the air around it smelled stale. We were staring at it when the innkeeper appeared behind us. His voice startled us. "That room's been shut for decades. No guests there. Best to leave it alone." "Why is it locked?" my girlfriend asked. The old man gave a thin smile. "Some rooms remember their past. This one remembers too much." And with that, he shuffled off down the hall. That night, it started. Around midnight, as we lay in bed drifting off, we heard it faint, but distinct. Knock, knock, knock. 3 slow raps echoing from down the hall. We froze, listening. Another set of knocks came, louder this time. My girlfriend whispered, "It's coming from that locked door." I tried to dismiss it, telling her it was probably another guest messing around. But deep down, I knew the sound wasn't coming from an occupied room. It was hollow, heavy, like knuckles against thick wood. The knocking stopped after a few minutes, and eventually we drifted into uneasy sleep. The second night, it returned. This time, it was louder, angrier. The knocks came in quick bursts, like someone pounding with both fists. We could hear it all the way from our room, the vibrations faintly shuddering through the floorboards. My girlfriend clutched my arm and whispered, "Someone's in there." I tried to convince her it was just the building settling, but then, clear as day, we heard something else. A voice, muffled, distorted by the door and distance, but definitely a voice. A man's, low and desperate. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. Pleading. The next morning, I cornered the innkeeper. "Listen," I said, "someone's in that room. We heard them. They were pounding and yelling. You need to check it." His expression didn't change. He just shook his head slowly. "That room is empty. It's been empty since before you were born. No one goes in, and no one comes out." I wanted to argue, but there was something in his eyes, something that said he wasn't going to explain further. That night, our last, the knocking came again. This time, it didn't stop. It started at 2 in the morning. Relentless, violent pounding. The sound of a fist hammering against the wood with such force I swore the lock would break. My girlfriend was trembling, tears in her eyes, begging me not to leave the room. But I couldn't just sit there. I grabbed the flashlight from my bag and stepped into the hallway. The corridor was dim, lit only by a weak bulb at the far end. As I crept closer, the sound grew louder. Knock, knock, knock. My light shook in my hand as I raised it. The locked door rattled with each blow. Dust sifted from the frame. And then suddenly, the pounding stopped. I stood frozen, my breath fogging in the cold air. From the other side of the door came a sound that still makes my stomach clench. A long, dragging scrape, like fingernails slowly clawing down the wood. Then a whisper. Close. Right at the crack of the door. It said my name. I stumbled back, flashlight beam dancing across the walls. My girlfriend was crying softly at the end of the hall, begging me to come back. I didn't need to be told twice. We packed what little we had and sat awake until dawn. When the sun came up, we left the key on the counter and didn't look back. The innkeeper didn't ask why. He just watched us go with that same tired expression, like he'd seen it all before. I'll never forget that locked door, the voice behind it, or the way it knew my name. And sometimes, late at night, I wonder if it's still knocking waiting for someone to finally open it. The stew on the campfire was still bubbling, yet there wasn't a single person left in the campsite. A few summers ago, 2 friends and I went backpacking through a stretch of forest in the Pacific Northwest. It wasn't a popular trail, which was part of the appeal: quiet, remote, untouched. The 3 of us had hiked all day, and by late afternoon, we were exhausted and ready to set up our tents. That's when we smelled it, the unmistakable scent of food cooking over a fire. Something savory, drifting faintly on the breeze. We figured it meant other campers were nearby, which surprised us. We hadn't seen a soul since we'd started, and the trail wasn't exactly easy. Still, the smell was comforting, like proof we weren't the only ones out there. We followed it off the main path and soon came upon a clearing. There, tucked between the trees, was a campsite. At first glance, it looked completely normal. 2 tents neatly pitched side by side. Backpacks propped against a log. Sleeping bags unrolled inside the tents. And in the center, a small fire crackling, with a pot of stew bubbling over it. But no people. "Hello?" I called out. My voice carried through the trees, but there was no answer. We circled the site cautiously. The food on the fire was fresh steam rising, vegetables floating, the broth still boiling. There were bowls laid out on a stump, spoons set beside them, as if the campers had just stepped away for a moment. But the longer we looked, the stranger it felt. The packs were still full, zippers open, gear untouched. The tents had clothes neatly folded inside. It was as if the people had vanished in the middle of setting up dinner. And the silence. That was what really got to me. The forest had gone completely still. No birds, no insects, no wind. Just the soft pop of the fire and the occasional bubble of stew. We debated what to do. One of my friends suggested waiting. Maybe they'd gone to collect water. But something in my gut screamed at me to leave. There was no reason for a group of hikers to abandon everything they had, not without taking a flashlight, a jacket, anything. Still, curiosity pulled us in. I bent down to stir the stew with the spoon left beside it. It was hot, almost scalding. Whatever had happened, it had been recent. Then I noticed something that made my stomach drop. There were no footprints, not around the fire, not leading to or from the tents. The dirt was smooth, untouched, except for where we ourselves had stepped. We didn't talk much after that. We just exchanged uneasy looks, grabbed our packs, and decided to move on. None of us wanted to spend the night anywhere near that clearing. But as we rejoined the trail, something stopped us in our tracks. From behind, back at the campsite, came the faint sound of voices. Not shouts, not conversation, just low murmuring. Dozens of whispers all layered together. The kind of sound you hear when you stand outside a crowded room. Indistinct, but undeniably human. My friend turned to look, but I grabbed his arm. "Don't," I hissed. I don't know how I knew, but I was certain if we looked back, we'd see something we weren't meant to. So we walked, fast. We hiked until darkness fell, too terrified to stop. Our headlamps bouncing wildly against the trees. Only when we were completely drained did we set up our own camp, far from the site. None of us spoke about it, not even in whispers. The next morning, we retraced part of the trail to see if the other campers had returned. But when we reached the spot, the clearing was empty. No tents, no fire pit, no sign anyone had ever been there. Just bare earth and silence. To this day, none of us can explain it. We weren't dehydrated. We weren't hallucinating. We saw that campsite, smelled the food, felt the heat of the fire, and yet it was gone. Sometimes when I'm alone in the woods, I swear I catch that same smell again, the faint aroma of stew cooking over an open flame. And I always keep walking. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of my mother softly calling my name, except she was supposed to be hundreds of miles away. Last summer, I decided to take a solo camping trip in the Adirondacks. I'd been going through a rough patch, and the idea of disconnecting from everything, no phone, no work, no people, felt like the reset I needed. I picked a quiet site near a small lake, pitched my tent, built a fire, and settled into the silence. The first day was uneventful. I hiked, cooked a simple meal, and sat watching the stars spill across the sky. The forest was alive with sound frogs croaking, insects buzzing, the occasional owl hooting. By the time I crawled into my sleeping bag, I was exhausted. Sometime in the dead of night, I woke up. At first, I wasn't sure why. The forest had gone silent. Not quiet or silent. No crickets, no frogs, no wind in the trees. Just heavy stillness. My ears strained in the dark, and that's when I heard it. My name. It was soft, almost a whisper, but unmistakable. A woman's voice. My blood ran cold. It was my mother's voice. She called again, a little louder, as if standing just outside the thin nylon wall of my tent. "Sweetheart, come out here." I froze. My mom lived 6 hours away. She didn't even know the exact location of my campsite. And even if she had, there was no possible way she was here. I lay perfectly still, heart hammering so hard I thought it might give me away. The voice came again, sweet, coaxing. "It's okay. You can come out now." My throat went dry. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. Instead, I slowly reached for the flashlight at my side, my hand trembling so badly I almost dropped it. I flicked it on, flooding the tent with harsh white light. The voice stopped instantly. The silence outside was so deep, it felt suffocating. For nearly an hour, I sat there, clutching the flashlight like a weapon, straining to hear anything: footsteps, breathing, movement. Nothing. Eventually, exhaustion forced me back to sleep, though it was the most restless sleep I'd ever had. When I woke at dawn, everything looked normal. Birds were chirping again. The lake shimmered. The fire pit was just a circle of cold ash. I tried to tell myself I dreamed it. Stress, exhaustion, an overactive imagination. But then I saw the footprints. Just outside my tent, in the damp soil, were 2 prints. Bare feet. Small, delicate. They circled my tent once before disappearing into the trees. I packed up fast. By mid-morning, I was back on the trail, moving as quickly as I could. But I couldn't shake the sound of that voice. The way it had been perfect. Not just similar to my mom's identical. Every inflection, every tone. Exactly right. That night, I camped at a different spot, farther down the trail. I built a fire higher than before, kept my flashlight and knife at my side, and forced myself to stay awake as long as I could. Around midnight, fatigue dragged me under. I woke again to silence. And then, "My name? Please, it's cold out here." This time, the voice wasn't soft. It was urgent, closer. I could hear it move from one side of the tent to the other, as though circling me. "Let me in." I pressed my hands over my ears, but the voice cut through, clear as day. My mother's voice, but stretched thin, as if something was wearing it like a mask. The zipper of my tent shifted, just slightly, enough to make the teeth of it jingle. Something was trying to pull it down. I snapped on the flashlight and lunged toward the zipper, shouting as loud as I could. The movement stopped. The voice went silent. For the rest of the night, nothing happened. But when dawn came, I found the zipper halfway undone, though I knew I hadn't touched it. I didn't stay another night. I hiked straight back to the trailhead, faster than I thought I could manage with the pack weighing on me. I've never camped alone again. And sometimes, even in my apartment, when I'm half asleep, I think I hear it. My mother's voice, soft and familiar, whispering my name from just outside the door, always asking me to let her in. I waved at the lifeguard sitting high in the tower, and when I looked again, the chair was completely empty. Last August, I spent a few days at the coast trying to clear my head. It was off-season, so the beach was quiet, the kind of place where you could walk for half a mile and only see a handful of people. The sky was overcast, the water gray and choppy, but I'd grown up near the ocean and didn't mind the solitude. That first afternoon, I went for a swim. The air was cooler than I liked, and the water stung against my skin, but it felt good to get out past the breakers. I floated on my back, staring up at the dull sky, letting the sound of waves drown out everything else. After a while, I glanced back toward the beach. There was a lifeguard tower, maybe 50 yards away. To my relief, someone was sitting in it. A tall figure in a red hoodie, elbows resting on their knees, head tilted toward the ocean. It was comforting, knowing someone was watching. I raised an arm and waved. The figure didn't move at first, but then slowly lifted a hand in return. The gesture was stiff, but it was enough. I smiled and swam farther out, reassured. A few minutes later, when I looked back again, the chair was empty. Not just empty, the seat was swaying slightly, as if someone had just climbed down. I scanned the beach for a lifeguard walking the sand, but there was no one. Just the chair, tall and still against the gray horizon. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. I told myself maybe I'd imagined the wave, or maybe the guard had gone on a break. Still, I swam back to shore quicker than I'd planned, my chest tight with unease. When I reached the sand, I walked straight to the tower. The ladder was old, weathered wood, and the seat up top was covered in a fine layer of sand. There were no footprints around the base, no sign anyone had been there at all. That night, I tried to shake it off. Maybe I'd been more tired than I realized, but the image of that slow, stiff wave lingered in my mind. The next day, I returned to the beach. The weather had cleared slightly, though the air still carried that heavy, salty dampness. A couple of families were scattered along the shore, kids building sandcastles, parents sunbathing under blankets. I felt less alone, which helped. I swam again, keeping closer to shore this time. After a few minutes, I glanced at the tower out of habit. Someone was there again. This time, I saw the figure more clearly. A man, I think pale, thin, leaning forward in the chair. He wasn't wearing red anymore. Instead, he looked drenched, his clothes clinging darkly to his frame. From where I floated, I couldn't make out his face, but I had the strangest impression he was staring directly at me. My throat went dry. I lifted my hand halfway, hesitating, and gave a small wave. The figure responded instantly, jerking his arm upward in the same stiff motion as before. My pulse hammered in my ears. I turned and swam hard for the shore, salt water burning my throat as I gasped. When I finally stumbled onto the sand, I looked back up. The tower was empty again. I asked one of the families nearby if there were supposed to be lifeguards on duty that week. The father gave me a puzzled look. No, not after Labor Day. The towers are all unmanned until summer. I didn't go back into the water. Instead, I sat wrapped in a towel, staring at that empty chair. The longer I watched it, the more wrong it seemed. Like the ocean itself was waiting for me to look away, so whatever sat there could return unnoticed. That evening, back in my rented cottage, I couldn't shake the feeling I was being watched. Every creak of the old floorboards made me jump. At one point, I glanced out the window toward the shoreline. The tower was just visible in the distance. And for a split second, silhouetted against the fading sky, I saw a figure seated at the top still, silent, facing my window. When I blinked, it was gone. I cut my trip short after that, packed up the next morning, and drove inland without looking back. But sometimes, when I close my eyes at night, I see it again. That pale, soaked figure lifting one stiff hand in a slow wave. And I can't help but wonder if it was trying to warn me or trying to call me back into the water. He was in every photo I took on the boardwalk, same pale face, same black jacket, always staring straight at the camera. The summer before my senior year, my friends and I spent a weekend at the shore. It was one of those beach towns that comes alive at night. Arcades glowing with neon, funnel cake stands, carnival rides spinning above the boardwalk. The place was crowded but safe, the kind of scene where everyone had their phones out snapping pictures. That first night, I was taking a bunch of random photos, friends laughing with cotton candy, strangers playing skee-ball, the Ferris wheel lit up in the distance. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Until later, when I scrolled through them. At first, I didn't notice. But after a few swipes, something made me stop. In the corner of one shot, just behind my friend, biting into a corn dog, was a man. Mid-30s, maybe, wearing a black jacket despite the summer heat. His face was pale, his expression blank, and his eyes. They were locked directly on the camera. I thought it was just coincidence. People end up in the background of photos all the time. But then I kept scrolling. There he was again. Another picture, this time behind a group of kids at the arcade. Same jacket, Same pale face, staring directly at me through the lens. My stomach tightened. I went through every photo I'd taken that night, and in nearly all of them, there he was. Not close, not obvious. Always lingering at the edge of the frame. Always staring. I showed my friends, but they laughed it off. Probably just some dude who kept ending up in the crowd, one said. Another joked, maybe he's your secret admirer. They thought I was overreacting, so I dropped it. But I couldn't shake the feeling of those eyes on me. The next night, we went back to the boardwalk. I tried not to think about it, snapping a few more pictures here and there. When I checked them in real time, my blood ran cold. He was still there. In one photo, he stood half hidden in the crowd by the carousel. In another, his face glared from behind a family buying ice cream. And in the last, the clearest one, he was directly behind me, just a few feet away, his gaze drilling into the lens like he'd been waiting for me to notice. I spun around, phone clutched in my hand, heart pounding, but he wasn't there. Just a sea of strangers laughing and walking past. For the rest of the night, I couldn't enjoy myself. I kept glancing over my shoulder, scanning every face, expecting to see him. My friends teased me, but eventually even they grew quiet. Because around midnight, while we were sitting on a bench eating fries, one of them turned pale. "Don't look now," she whispered, "but I think he's over there." I froze. Slowly, I tilted my head just enough to glance across the boardwalk. And there he was, leaning against the railing, maybe 20 yards away. Same black jacket, same pale face. Just standing there, staring straight at us. When I locked eyes with him, he tilted his head slightly, like he was curious. Then he turned and walked into the crowd. I bolted after him. My friends yelled for me to stop, but I couldn't. I shoved through the throngs of people, scanning left and right, but he was gone, completely vanished. That night, back at the motel, I couldn't sleep. I sat scrolling through every photo again, zooming in, trying to make sense of it. But the more I looked, the worse it got. Because in the earliest photos, the ones I'd taken right when we first arrived at the boardwalk, he was there too. Even when I hadn't noticed him at all. The next morning, I deleted every picture, but it didn't matter. Because when I opened my phone camera to check, the live preview showed him again, standing just behind me in the motel mirror, staring straight at the lens. I dropped the phone. When I picked it up, the screen was black, and I haven't taken another photo since. When we woke up, the entire family that had been camping beside us the night before was gone along with every trace that they'd ever been there. 2 summers ago, my wife, our 2 kids, and I went camping in a state park up north. It wasn't far from the city, but the campground was remote enough that once the sun went down, you felt completely isolated. The first night, we set up our tent at a site near the lake. Right next to us, a family of 4 had already pitched their tent, a couple about our age, with 2 kids just a little older than ours. They introduced themselves, shared some extra firewood, and before long, we were all sitting around the flames together. It was the kind of easy camaraderie you get while camping. We swapped stories, passed snacks back and forth, and even made plans to hike together the next morning. Their kids played flashlight tag with ours, while we adults nursed a couple of drinks. I remember thinking how nice it felt, how rare it was to click so quickly with strangers. We finally called it a night around midnight. They doused their fire, said goodnight, and we all went to our tents. I woke up around 3 a.m. to the sound of voices. At first, I thought maybe one of the kids was up, but the voices were low, steady. 2 adults. I couldn't make out the words, just the tone serious, almost tense. I considered peeking out, but decided against it. Whatever it was their business. Eventually, I drifted back to sleep. The next morning, when I unzipped our tent, I expected to see their camp just a few feet away. Instead, I froze. The site was empty. Completely empty. No tent, no chairs, no cooler, not even a fire pit. The ground was bare, like no one had ever been there at all. I stood there, dumbfounded, until my wife joined me. She looked just as confused. Our kids came out too, asking where their new friends had gone. I walked over to the site, half expecting to find some sign they'd left early, a footprint, a scrap of trash, anything. But there was nothing. And I mean nothing. The earth where their tent had been was smooth, too smooth, as if the dirt had never been disturbed in the first place. Even the patch of flattened grass where we'd been sitting together the night before looked untouched, blades standing tall and straight. We went to the camp host later that morning, thinking maybe the family had checked out early. He frowned and checked his clipboard. "No one was registered at the site next to you," he said. "It's been empty all season." I tried to argue. I described them the parents, the kids, even the dog they'd tied to a tree. But the host just shook his head. "You must be mistaken. That site's been vacant for weeks." The rest of the trip felt wrong after that. We didn't talk about it much, not in front of the kids, but the unease clung to us. We cut our camping short by a day, packed up, and headed home. But here's the part that still chills me. A week later, I was scrolling through the photos on my phone, showing my wife the ones of our kids roasting marshmallows. That's when I noticed something. In the background of one shot, where the other family should have been sitting, the firelight caught something else. Not people, just 4 dark shapes, standing behind their own fire, perfectly still, watching us. And when I zoomed in, I realized the faces weren't faces at all. Just pale ovals, featureless, glowing faintly in the dark. We had sat there all night, swapping stories, sharing food, laughing with them. But whatever was beside us that night, it wasn't a family. And it wasn't supposed to be there. When the elevator door slid open, every door in the hallway stood wide open, yet the entire floor was silent and empty. Last summer, I booked a few nights at a beachfront hotel while traveling for work. It wasn't fancy, but it had a view of the ocean and a decent reputation online. The lobby was bustling when I checked in, families carrying coolers, kids still dripping from the pool, couples in beachwear heading out for dinner. It felt normal, almost comforting. My room was on the 6th floor. The first night was uneventful. Waves outside my window, the low hum of traffic on the strip below. I slept fine. The second night, I decided to grab a soda from the vending machine before bed. I left my room a little after midnight and took the elevator down, half asleep and barefoot. But when I pressed the button for the lobby, the elevator jolted strangely and stopped on the 4th floor instead. The doors opened. At first, I thought it was just another hallway. The same dull carpet, the same cream-colored walls. But then I noticed something strange. Every single door was open. Not cracked, not ajar wide open. Perfectly aligned, each room exposed like a diorama. I stepped out slowly, peering into the first doorway. The room looked exactly like mine. Identical bedspread, same framed beach print on the wall, same little desk in the corner. I moved to the next room. Same thing. And the next. And the next. Dozens of rooms, carbon copies, all empty. The air was heavy and still, like the AC had been turned off. My bare feet sank into the carpet as I walked farther down the hall. A faint smell clung to the place, something stale, almost chemical. "Hello?" I called, my voice echoing strangely. No answer. That's when I realized what was bothering me most. There weren't any sounds. No TVs muffled through walls, no pipes groaning, no distant laughter from late-night guests. The entire floor was silent, like it had been cut off from the rest of the hotel. I turned back toward the elevator, but it had already closed. My pulse quickened. I pressed the call button, jabbing it over and over, but nothing happened. Behind me, something shifted. Not loud, just the faintest creak of a mattress. I froze. One of the doors at the far end of the hall seemed darker than the others, the room beyond swallowed in shadow. I couldn't see inside, but I had the unnerving sense that something was standing just beyond the threshold, watching. My throat tightened. I backed away slowly, forcing myself not to turn around. My eyes flicked from one identical room to the next, each one a mirror of the last, as if I were walking past the same space over and over again. When I finally reached the end of the hall, there was no exit, just another wall with a single framed beach print, identical to the ones in every room. That's when the lights flickered. For a split second, the rooms weren't empty anymore. In each doorway, I saw figures, pale, blurred shapes, standing perfectly still, all facing me. When the lights steadied, the rooms were vacant again. My heart pounded in my ears. I ran back down the hallway, past the open doors, past the repeating furniture, until I reached the elevator. I slammed the button, praying, whispering out loud for the doors to open. When they finally did, I stumbled inside, hitting the button for the 6th floor. The doors closed with agonizing slowness. As they did, I caught one last glimpse of the hallway. Every figure was closer now. When the doors shut completely, I sagged against the wall, gasping. The elevator shuddered and began to rise. By the time I made it back to my room, I was drenched in sweat. I double-locked the door, shoved a chair against the handle, and sat awake until dawn. The next morning, I asked the front desk if anyone was staying on the 4th floor. The clerk frowned and shook her head. That floor's under renovation. It's been closed for months. I checked out early that same day, and sometimes, late at night, I dream I'm standing in that hallway again, every door open, every room the same. Only this time, when the lights flicker, the figures don't disappear. They step forward. Halfway across the lake, the world went silent, our splashing. Our voices, even our screams, swallowed whole by the water. It was late July when 3 of my closest friends and I went camping in the Rockies. We'd picked a spot near a high-altitude lake, the kind you only reach after a few hours of hiking. The water looked like glass under the sun, framed by dark pines and jagged peaks. It felt untouched, almost sacred. By the second day, the heat was brutal, so we decided to swim. The lake was wide but calm, and someone probably half-joking suggested we try to cross it. One by one, we splashed into the icy water, laughing, shouting, daring each other to make it all the way across. At first, it was perfect. The cold bit into our skin, but the sun on our backs made it bearable. We yelled back and forth, echoing across the trees. The water slapped rhythmically against our arms, our gasps and laughter carrying across the still lake. And then, halfway across, it stopped. Not the swimming, we were still moving, still splashing, but the sound. My friend Caleb had just shouted something, probably another joke, but the words cut off mid-sentence, like someone had hit mute on the world. The splash of my own arms vanished. My breathing, ragged and fast, disappeared too. I tried to yell. Nothing, not even the faintest echo inside my own head. Just silence, heavy and absolute. I stopped swimming, panic rising in my chest. The others did too. We all stared at each other across the water, wide-eyed, mouths opening and closing like fish, but not a single sound escaped. I slapped the surface of the lake hard, desperate for something. It rippled, but it was silent, as if the water was devouring the noise. My heartbeat thundered inside me, but even that felt muffled, wrong, like it wasn't fully mine anymore. That's when I noticed the water. It wasn't just quiet, it was still, perfectly smooth, except where our bodies disturbed it. Even the ripples we made seemed to flatten too quickly, vanishing as if the lake refused to carry them. The silence pressed against me, suffocating. My lungs felt heavy, like they were filling with something other than air. I tried to call out again, my throat straining, but the sound died before it left me. Then Caleb pointed down. At first, I thought he was just panicking. But when I forced myself to look, my stomach turned to ice. Beneath us, maybe 20 feet down, the water was darker. Too dark, like a shadow stretching across the entire width of the lake. It wasn't the lake bed, it was moving. A slow, pulsing shape, vast and indistinct, shifting just below the silence. I kicked frantically, trying to swim back toward shore. The others followed, arms slicing through the water, faces twisted in silent screams. But no matter how hard we swam, the shoreline didn't seem to get closer. The silence grew heavier, crushing. My vision tunneled. I felt like I was being pulled downward, the water thickening around me, dragging me into that shadow below. And then, all at once, the sound came back. The splash of water, the ragged gasps of my friends, the echo of our screams, it all slammed into me like a wave. We broke the surface together, thrashing, coughing, crying out loud for the first time in what felt like hours. We were only a few feet from shore. Somehow, impossibly, we'd made it back without realizing. We stumbled onto the rocks, collapsing, our bodies shaking from cold and terror. No one spoke for a long time. When we finally did, it was just to confirm that we'd all experienced the same thing, the silence, the shadow, the feeling of being pulled under. We packed up camp that same afternoon, hiking down without looking back. I haven't been able to swim in a lake since. Pools, the ocean, those I can handle. But whenever I see the glossy surface of a mountain lake, my chest tightens. Because sometimes, when the water is still enough, I swear I can see that same dark shape stirring below, waiting. And I know if I ever went back in, I wouldn't come out again. The counselor's ghost story wasn't just familiar. It was the exact nightmare ID had the night before, down to the smallest detail. When I was 13, my parents sent me to a week-long summer camp in upstate New York. It wasn't my first camp, but it was the first time I'd ever stayed somewhere so deep in the woods. The cabins were rustic, the nights pitch black except for the stars, and the counselors loved leaning into the spooky vibe after dark. The first night was fine long hikes, camp games, and dinner in the mess hall. But that night, when I finally drifted off in my bunk, I had a dream. No, not a dream. A nightmare. In it, I was walking alone through the woods near camp. The forest was unnaturally quiet, the trees leaning in close. I stumbled into a clearing where an old well sat, covered in moss. Something about it made me sick to my stomach, but I couldn't stop walking toward it. When I leaned over the edge, I saw a face staring back at me. Not a reflection. A pale, hollow-eyed man grinning from the darkness below. His lips moved soundlessly, but then a voice filled my head. "I'll climb out when you forget to watch me." I jolted awake in my cabin, drenched in sweat, heart pounding. The next day, I tried to brush it off. Just a nightmare. I didn't tell anyone how do you explain something like that without sounding crazy. That night, after dinner, the counselors led us to the fire pit. We roasted marshmallows, laughed, and sang songs. When the flames died down, one of the older counselors, Jason, said it was time for a ghost story. He grinned, shining a flashlight under his chin. "This one's about a well not too far from here," he began. My blood went cold. He launched into the tale, describing kids who wandered off into the woods at night and found a mossy stone well in a clearing. He told it playfully at first, the way you do for campers, but every word hit me like a hammer. He said the well wasn't empty, that something lived at the bottom. A man, a pale man with black, hollow eyes who whispered promises to anyone who leaned too close. I stared at him, frozen, my marshmallow slipping off the stick into the dirt. My bunkmates laughed nervously, hanging on every word, but all I could think was, this is my nightmare. Exactly. Jason's voice dropped lower, more serious. And if you ever stop watching him, he said, if you look away, he climbs out. My stomach twisted. That was word for word what I'd heard in my dream. I must have gone pale because one of the other kids nudged me. Dude, you look sick. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. The story ended with Jason lunging forward, making everyone scream and laugh. But I didn't laugh. I sat there shaking because I knew that story hadn't just been made up. Somehow, he described my nightmare perfectly. Back in the cabin, I barely slept. Every creak outside made me flinch. Every shadow looked like something crawling out of the ground. When I did drift off, I dreamed of the well, again this time closer. The man's fingers gripped the stone lip, pulling himself up inch by inch. The next morning, I finally told Jason. I caught him after breakfast and said, that story you told, it wasn't just a story. I dreamed that exact thing the night before. He froze. The grin dropped from his face. He looked at me carefully and said, don't joke about that. I'm not, I said. I saw the well. I saw the man before you told it. Jason's face went pale. He glanced around, lowered his voice, and muttered, you shouldn't dream about the well. And then he walked away. He didn't tell another ghost story the rest of camp. That night, I woke up again to silence. I don't know what made me do it, but I turned my head toward the cabin window. Through the glass, in the faint glow of moonlight, I saw a figure standing in the trees. Tall, pale, watching. I squeezed my eyes shut, heart hammering, repeating to myself, don't forget to watch him. Don't forget, don't forget. When I opened them again, the figure was gone. I never went back to that camp. And to this day, I can't stand the sight of old stone wells, because every time I see one, I half expect to find him waiting at the bottom, smiling, and ready to climb out. We took the exit for gas, but somehow, within minutes, we were back on the same empty stretch of highway, the station nowhere in sight. It was the summer of 2019, when my wife, our son, and I were driving cross-country to visit family. We'd been on the road all day, and by the time night fell, we were running low on gas somewhere in the middle of Nebraska. The road stretched endlessly in both directions, black fields on either side, nothing but headlights carving through the dark. When the glowing green sign finally appeared, gas, food, lodging, exit 23, we all sighed in relief. I flicked on the blinker and took the ramp. The road curved down gently, a familiar routine. But at the bottom, there was nothing. No gas station lights. No diner signs. Just a narrow two-lane road cutting through more farmland. Maybe it's a little further down, my wife said, though she didn't sound convinced. I drove on slowly. The asphalt looked old, cracked, like it hadn't been used in years. Our headlights stretched ahead, illuminating only more road, more darkness. I checked the rearview mirror. The highway ramp behind us was gone, just a seamless stretch of empty road fading into night. My chest tightened. Did you miss a turn? My wife asked quietly. I don't think so, I said, though my voice wavered. We drove another mile, then another. Still nothing. Just empty fields. No houses, no signs, not even telephone poles. The world outside the car felt dead, like we were driving deeper into a place we weren't supposed to be. Then, without warning, the road curved sharply. I turned the wheel and suddenly, we were back on the highway. Same stretch, same endless blacktop. The green exit sign loomed ahead of us again. Exit 23. My wife grabbed my arm. You saw that, right? I know, I muttered, my grip tightening on the wheel. My son stirred in the back seat, mumbling in his sleep. We were running out of gas, but I couldn't bring myself to take the exit again. My knuckles whitened on the steering wheel as I passed it. But a few miles later, The gauge dipped closer to empty, and the anxiety of being stranded in the middle of nowhere overpowered my fear. "We have to try again," my wife whispered. I didn't want to. God, I didn't. But I nodded, and when the sign came up exit 23, the exact same sign, the exact same angle of ramp, I took it again. This time, the road at the bottom was darker. Our headlights seemed to dim, swallowed by the night. I pressed the gas pedal harder, urging the car forward. My wife clutched our son's shoulder gently, trying not to wake him. Half a mile in, we saw lights. A glow on the horizon. Relief flooded me. I sped up, heart pounding, but as we got closer, my stomach turned. The lights weren't from a gas station. They were from houses. Dozens of houses, lined neatly on either side of the road, but they weren't right. Every single one was identical. Same one-story shape, same peeling paint, same porch light flickering faintly. No cars in the driveways. No curtains in the windows. No movement. Just endless rows of houses stretching into the dark. And then I saw them. Figures standing on the porches. Still, unmoving. Too many to count. Their heads turned slowly as we passed, following the car in unison. "Don't look," I whispered to my wife, though I couldn't tear my eyes away. My son whimpered softly in his sleep, as if he sensed something. We drove faster. The houses blurred, the figures faded into the dark. And then, suddenly, the road curved again. We were back on the highway. No houses, no figures. Just empty blacktop stretching forever. The gas gauge still hovered near empty, but I didn't dare take the exit again. We drove in silence, both of us glancing nervously at the mirrors, at the fields beyond the glass. An hour later, though it felt longer, we finally found a real exit. A brightly lit truck stop, crowded with semis, people milling around under neon lights. I've never felt such relief. We didn't mention what we saw. Not to each other, not to anyone else. But sometimes, late at night, when I'm on the road alone, I see a green sign glowing in the distance. Gas, food, lodging, exit 23. And I keep driving, because I know if I take it again, I won't come back. Halfway up the dune, another set of footprints appeared beside ours, starting from nowhere, as if someone had simply materialized out of the sand. Last summer, my girlfriend and I took a weekend trip to the coast. We spent the day exploring the little beach town boardwalk food, a few shops, and by evening we wandered toward the dunes. The sun was low, casting long shadows across the sand. The breeze off the ocean was cool, carrying that salty tang you only get near the shore. We kicked off our shoes and started climbing one of the taller dunes. The sand was soft and loose, every step sinking ankle deep. Behind us, our footprints trailed in a neat line down the slope, proof of our climb. About halfway up, my girlfriend stopped. "Do you see that?" she asked, her voice tight. I followed her gaze. Another set of prints ran parallel to ours, barefoot, just like us. Except they didn't start at the bottom of the dune. They started right next to mine, halfway up, as though someone had dropped out of the sky and continued alongside us. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Maybe someone came across from the other side? I suggested, though I didn't believe it even as I said it. She shook her head. "Look, they're only going one direction." She was right. The prints followed ours upward, side by side. But there were none coming down, none from another path. Just sudden, clean impressions in the sand, deep and fresh. We stood there for a long moment, the silence stretching. Then we kept climbing, slower this time, both of us glancing over our shoulders. The second trail of prints followed every turn we made, every pause, always beside us. At the top, we expected to see someone, but the crest of the dune was empty. No people, no footprints continuing past ours, just untouched sand stretching into the distance. My girlfriend grabbed my hand. I want to go back. So we turned, and my heart stopped. The second trail of footprints had changed. They were no longer beside ours. They were behind us. Step for step, following in perfect rhythm with our own, all the way back down the dune. My girlfriend's grip tightened painfully. "We didn't hear anyone," she whispered. And she was right. The sand should have crunched, shifted, made some sound. But the dunes were silent, except for the wind. We started down, moving quickly now. Our footprints overlapped with the other trail, merging, until I couldn't tell which were ours anymore. My chest felt tight, every step harder than the last. Halfway down, we stopped again. The second trail no longer led beside us or behind us. It circled. Clear as day in the sand, the prints looped around our path, encircling us like someone had been running in a wide arc. My stomach dropped as I realized what that meant. Whatever was leaving those prints wasn't just following. It was moving around us. We didn't speak. We just bolted. By the time we reached the bottom, we were both shaking. I dared one last glance up the dune, and I swear I saw something. A figure, just at the crest. Tall, unmoving, silhouetted against the dying sun. I couldn't make out a face. Couldn't even be sure it was human. But it stood exactly where our trail had ended, watching. We ran back to town without stopping. That night, neither of us slept well. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those prints appearing in the sand, step by step, as if something invisible was walking right beside me. The next morning, we drove home early. We didn't even talk about it until weeks later, when my girlfriend admitted something that made my skin crawl. She said she'd looked back one last time before we ran, and she swore the prints weren't just beside ours. They were leading directly into ours, like something had been trying to step in the same places we had, erasing itself as it followed. I've never gone back to the dunes, because I can't stop wondering. If we had hesitated just a little longer, if we turned to look at the exact wrong moment, would we have seen who or what was walking in our footprints? The guest book in the cabin wasn't filled with cheerful reviews. It was filled with frantic warnings, begging us not to stay the night. Last fall, my girlfriend and I decided to get away from the city for a weekend. We found a small Airbnb listed as a secluded mountain cabin. The pictures showed cozy wood-paneled walls, a stone fireplace, and a view of the forest. It seemed perfect. We arrived late in the afternoon, after a long drive up winding back roads. The cabin sat at the end of a gravel path, half hidden by trees. It looked just like the photos charming, if a little run down. Inside, it smelled faintly of cedar and something else, older, like mildew or dust. The host had left a handwritten welcome note on the counter, along with a thick leather-bound guest book. I opened it out of curiosity, expecting the usual scribbles about how peaceful the place was, or recommendations for nearby hiking trails. But that wasn't what was inside. The first few entries looked normal praise about the view, compliments about the cabin's charm. But after a few pages, the tone shifted. "Do not stay here overnight. We left before dark. Something isn't right." My girlfriend leaned over my shoulder, frowning. I turned another page. We heard footsteps on the porch at 2 a.m. No one was there. Don't ignore the warnings, leave while you can. Entry after entry, the same theme. Warnings. Some short, some long and rambling, all with the same desperate urgency. The woods are wrong here. Don't open the door if you hear knocking. We made it out, but just barely. My girlfriend laughed nervously, saying it had to be a prank, maybe the host playing into the spooky cabin aesthetic. But the writing didn't feel like a joke. The words were messy, rushed, some underlined so hard the pen had torn through the paper. I wanted to leave right then, but it was already getting dark. The drive back down the mountain was long and winding. Against my better judgment, we decided to stay just one night. As the sun dipped below the trees, The forest grew unnervingly quiet. No insects, no owls, just the crackle of the fire we built in the cabin's hearth. We tried to distract ourselves with wine and board games, but both of us kept glancing toward the guestbook on the counter, its pages heavy with dread. Around midnight, I woke to a sound. Knocking. 3 slow, deliberate knocks against the front door. I froze in bed, holding my breath. Another 3 knocks followed, louder this time. My girlfriend stirred beside me, whispering, "Did you hear that?" I nodded, my heart pounding. The guestbook warnings flashed in my head. Don't open the door if you hear knocking. We stayed still, straining to listen. The knocking stopped. For a moment, I thought maybe it had been the wind or a branch. But then, footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, pacing across the porch. Back and forth, back and forth. The sound of weight pressing into old wood, circling slowly, stopping just outside the bedroom wall. I grabbed my phone to call for help, no service. My girlfriend clutched my arm, whispering, "It's just an animal." It has to be. But we both knew no animal walked like that. The footsteps stopped. Silence pressed against the cabin, thick and suffocating. And then, faintly, from the living room, the sound of the guestbook's pages turning, one by one. We lay frozen, listening as the thick pages flipped, slowly, deliberately, as if someone were reading through them. My chest tightened, my pulse pounding in my ears. Then it stopped. We didn't sleep the rest of the night. When dawn finally came, we gathered our things and fled the cabin without looking back. On the drive down the mountain, my girlfriend finally asked a question we'd both been avoiding. If no one was in the cabin with us, how did the pages turn? I didn't answer, because before we left, I'd glanced at the guestbook one last time, and the final entry, in handwriting I didn't recognize, read, "We heard them too. They're still here, and they don't want you to leave." The lantern's glow bobbed gently along the shoreline, and when I followed the footprints it left behind, they stopped dead halfway up the beach. I've been night fishing for years, and most of the time it's peaceful, just me, the sound of water lapping, and the occasional tug on the line. That night was no different, or at least it wasn't supposed to be. I'd set up along a quiet lake in northern Maine, a place I'd fished plenty of times before. The air was cool, the moon hidden behind clouds, and the only light came from my little lantern set on a rock beside me. It must have been close to midnight when I saw it. Out of the corner of my eye, a glow shimmered along the far edge of the shoreline. At first, I thought it was another fisherman, but as I looked closer, the light wasn't steady like a flashlight. It swayed, rising and falling as though hanging from a rope handle. A lantern. I frowned. Nobody I knew still used lanterns. And who else would be wandering the lake at this hour? The glow moved slowly along the shore, bobbing with each step of whoever carried it. Something about the pace unsettled me. It wasn't rushed, but it wasn't casual either. Just steady, like the person had one very deliberate destination. I told myself it was nothing and went back to my line. But when I looked again, the lantern was closer, much closer. The shoreline was maybe 50 yards from where I sat, and I could now make out the shape of the figure holding it. Tall, thin, but oddly indistinct, as though the lantern's light wasn't bright enough to reveal its owner. I stood, suddenly uneasy. My own lantern flickered as if reacting to it. The figure stopped. The lantern hung still, swaying slightly in the night air. For a long, tense moment, neither of us moved. I wanted to call out, to ask if they needed help, but my throat locked up. Then, as if deciding, the figure turned and began walking away from the water, up the beach and toward the trees. Curiosity got the better of me. Against every instinct screaming at me to stay put, I grabbed my lantern and followed the shoreline until I reached the spot where the figure had been. That's when I saw the footprints. Clear impressions in the damp sand, barefoot, leading straight from the water's edge to the tree line. I followed them carefully, lantern held low. But halfway up the beach, the prints just stopped. The sand was smooth beyond that point, untouched. No scuff marks, no drag, no sign of a sudden turn. It was as if whoever had been walking had simply vanished mid-step. The lantern glow was gone too. The silence around me grew heavy, not just quiet wrong. No crickets, no breeze, not even the water lapping against the shore. The world had gone still, like the night was holding its breath. Then my lantern flickered again. I raised it, and in the dim light, I noticed something I hadn't before. Just at the edge of the footprints, the sand looked darker, damp, as though water had pooled there. I crouched to get a better look, and that's when I realized the wet patch wasn't a random. It was the shape of a hand. A single enormous handprint pressed into the sand, fingers splayed wide, the palm sunk deep as though something had pulled itself out of the lake. I stumbled back, nearly dropping my lantern. My instincts screamed at me to run, but my body felt rooted in place. Behind me, somewhere down the shoreline, I heard it. The faint swing of metal against glass, the lantern's creak. Slowly, deliberately, the sound moved closer. I didn't wait to see it again. I bolted back to my camp, heart slamming against my ribs, every step fueled by the terror that whatever had left those prints might be following. I threw my gear into the truck and drove until dawn, not daring to look in the rearview mirror. I never fished at that lake again. But sometimes, when I'm outside at night, I swear I hear the faint sway of a lantern swinging in the dark. And I know if I ever follow it again, the footprints won't just stop halfway. They'll be waiting behind me,